Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, June 16th, 2021. Just being deliberate about that so that we could get it right and get it spit out for once. And then, of course, wasted the time afterward clarifying why I had been so careful about getting it out carefully. Okay. No more comments on the date. We're writing it correctly on checks and everything, except we're not writing checks anymore, so we're done with this. All right, moving on. Oh, man. Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. That much I have learned for certain. Kagro X hopes you enjoyed your Eastern Orthodox drop a Republican down a well day, but now let's get back to the old grind, right? Time for it. Thanks very much, Bill, for the morning tweet. True, although, as my parents used to say, every day is, or could be, drop a Republican down a well day, and we should all be thankful for that. And if you happen upon an eligible well, then by all means, invite all your favorite Republicans over and, I don't know what, tell them critical race theory is plotting at the bottom and they should go get it. I don't know. All right. Plenty of stories for today. Greg Dworkin already winding up on sending forward his raft of stories. We're going to be having him join us in just a bit for the roundup. I don't know what I would say is the big news from the morning in Twitter world, although I did see, a few things where we could spend some time on. And a couple of the stories that I picked out, just conveniently enough, they've caught Greg's eye too, so I'm sure we'll get to those. I don't know what to say. This morning, a little bit of disappointment, although, I don't know. I guess we'll take it with a grain of salt. I expected that this was coming at some point. I knew this would show up at some level, and I don't know how seriously to take it, but I happened to see this morning Ben Siegel tweeting this morning in his coverage of things from Capitol Hill. Dems no longer pursuing records of Trump-Putin meetings. Those, I guess, would be including the meetings at various G everything summits, whether they were G20s or G7s before the expulsion, G8s, I guess, before the expulsion of Russia. Did we have any of those, or did Obama take care of that expulsion? I can't remember, but a few of their encounters, notably, I'm sure, the Helsinki summit and the missing notes, etc., but apparently Dems no longer pursuing records from out of those meetings, and I don't really know why, and can't give you a guess, but the comment here, sure to, I don't know what, catch your ears and give you grounds for a dejected sigh. The Biden administration is looking forward, not back. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Gregory Meeks told ABC News. And of course, didn't really want to hear even obliquely that we weren't going to be looking back on these things. But what can I tell you? Not only are we doing it, we're using the same cursed language to do it. Looking forward, not back. I suppose I should have expected as much. But it always hurts to hear it, especially after giving so many warnings against not only doing it, but against saying so as well. All right, well, I will open up the ABC News report just so I have it around and can use it to refer back, or perhaps I'll send you to the tweet, since that might be all we end up reading in all of this. It's not surprising. It's disappointing. And I don't know. I could see that the House Foreign Affairs Committee might not want to spend any amount of time pursuing those notes. But, they ought to be pursued perhaps in other sectors of government if the House Foreign Affairs Committee isn't going to do it. But if they're not going to do it, I don't know who's going to pick up the assignment, especially if, in fact, the Biden administration is dedicated to looking forward, not back. I can't see how any mistakes could come from that. And as I got by way of comment in response to all of that, good thing the United States is immune to the long-term consequences of catastrophic mistakes. Otherwise, we'd really be in trouble. So, okay, plenty to catch up on today. Greg's here to do it. I see prominent on your list something we discussed extensively yesterday, and I'm looking forward to hearing your take on it. I guess what I'm categorizing now as the astroturfing of opposition to critical race theory, an important story yesterday that we spent a lot of time diving into and embellishing where we could along the way. But plenty on your plate this morning, I can see already. Greg, how you doing?
Good. And since it's Wednesday, a relatively short segment, so I'll try to get off by a quarter two after the break. So when you did critical race theory yesterday,
yes.
Did you do the small Maine town that
yes,
NBC News had highlighted?
Yeah, we did, and we talked about how that's happening everywhere, and gave a couple examples of it happening elsewhere as well. But the Maine town, the guy who found out, I don't know, saw on Fox News one day about critical race theory, decided that was, well, I don't know if he had decided at that point it was going to be his life's work, but complaining to the local school board and then doing his own research online, as people like to call it, essentially, and getting himself matched up with so-called alternative facts that matched pretty much what he wanted to think he thought about this thing, and then launching a small cottage industry career based on it. It's a kind of it's a tale as old as time.
It is. Did you cover the Alabama lawmaker?
I don't know. You know what? I can't recall which one. I mean, we took a look at I think the same storyline. But which is the Alabama one? I can't remember. I can't keep them straight.
Well, the Alabama one was this Alabama lawmaker wants to ban critical race theory. So the reporter asked him what it is, and he couldn't answer.
No, we didn't talk about that one. Let's catch up.
Oh, that's a great one. And the reason I want to do that is that it's kind of a tie-in to the Southern Baptist convention that's going on, as well as some hearings on the Hill, where the military is being hit with CRT questions. So that's why I wanted to cover it.
Yes, that's right. Okay, there's plenty more outgrowth from yesterday's astroturfing. Let's do it.
Right. So the 2021 Alabama legislative session ended last month, says this piece, but Representative Pringle is already primed for the next one. He recently pre-filed a bill 8 months before the next session, and he's been up talking about it on the radio. So what does this bill say? Well, it's pretty simple, Pringle said. All it says is you can't teach critical race theory in K through 12 or higher education in the state of Alabama. And that's a short bill, if not a simple one. Of course, other people have pointed out it raises the question that if Juneteenth becomes a national holiday, as the Senate voted yesterday, then what's the point if you're not allowed to teach it?
I don't know. We just say it's out there and do your own research on the internet, kids, I guess. Anyway, it's a short bill, but not and a simple one. But it didn't answer the question, what is this critical race theory educators would be forbidden to teach? Yeah, well, you get prosecuted.
Now, remember, this is a process question. Pringle has seen enough legislation to understand law requires specificity. Many bills begin by laying out legal definitions. How would this bill define critical race theory? And Pringle said, well, it basically teaches certain children are inherently bad because of the color of their skin.
Yes,
and
basically.
That sounded pretty serious. That's like Nazi-like even. So I asked Pringle, the reporter said, if there's any critical race theorists he could point to who've been spreading such toxic garbage. Yeah, well, I can assure you I have to read a lot more.
Oh, I can assure you of that. No problem.
Right. So I began to get the feeling, the reporter said, that Pringle didn't know as much about critical race theory as I had hoped. Were there other examples you could give me where critical race theory was being put into practice? Well, these people, when they were doing the training programs, if you didn't buy into what they taught you 100%, they sent you away to re-education camps.
Yeah. I
now,
remember
Pringle was a little difficult to follow, but this sounded serious. These people, whoever they were, sounded terrifying. And if there were re-education camps operating in America, that would be big news. So who were these people? Now, Representative Pringle's a realtor, home builder, general contractor, and dug through what he called his executive suite, which was the cab of his pickup truck, looking for an article he'd read. And after a few moments of silence, he began to speak again, this time a bit haltingly. Well, it doesn't say who it is. It just says a government held these training sessions. And then basically the reporter asked for the link so that they could see the story, and he lost it and he couldn't find it. And that was his whole discussion, and then wouldn't talk about it anymore. So I just want to give you an idea of how people are picking this up. Talk about campaign in a box, where you get these talking points and you don't really understand them. And then as soon as you're questioned about them, it falls apart. I mean, I couldn't think of a better example.
Yeah. Well, me neither. But it's happened all over the place, certainly with this topic. But yeah, we also kind of looked back at the history of this stuff and how people have made, if not careers out of it, then certainly lucrative side hustles out of it. You get matched up with somebody on the internet who will provide you that campaign in a box, and they're happy to do it. And if you are active enough in pushing their stuff out the door and getting successful at getting yourself in the local newspaper, money starts to follow. And, you just start spending more and more of your time on it, and it pays for more and more of your house and puts more of the food on your table.
Especially in a pandemic when opportunities are limited. Right. The guy's a home builder, but, it's the middle of a pandemic. You got to do something to make money.
Yeah, something you
can do
from working from home.
It's more intellectual, and it's harder to defend and even get talking points than a similar scam, which is, the big lie about the big steal.
Right.
There, all you have to do is say, fraud.
Right. And
fraud happens, and I'm against fraud, and only, communists don't feel that way. Right. But this is harder because you have to actually know what it is to defend it, and they don't. So pretty clear. At the same time,
yes,
yesterday was another day of the Southern Baptist Convention meeting. And Anthea Butler, Professor B, was writing about it in MSNBC yesterday. Wow. Southern Baptist Convention 2021 offers a Trump and critical race theory litmus test. The Republican culture war playbook will be front and center at the high-profile meeting. And the culture war playbook basically was this was a election between the conservative and the very, very, very conservative, ultra-conservative. And the ultra-conservatives came in and saying, you guys have gone too far left. We understand that Southern Baptists started when the Southern Baptists broke away from the Northern Baptists because the Northern Baptists were abolitionists and the Southern Baptists wanted to support slavery. Very same reason Texas became an independent state, because they weren't keen on Mexico trying to outlaw slavery. So slavery is part of their background. They've apologized for it since. And the question on the table for the Southern Baptist Convention amongst the delegates, who are known as messengers, the messengers wanted to decide to continue to take that route, which in the end they did. They elected the more moderate of the two candidates after eliminating some others. And the very conservative ones wanted to say, you guys are too woke, you've gone too far left, and we need to just establish right away there's no place in this country for CRT, whatever it is, because we say so.
Yes.
Which is, in other words, going back to their roots.
Yeah, essentially, sure.
But the moderate won. And so the fact that CRT is coming up in places like this, again, declining members, the denomination's lost over 2 million members since 2006. But despite the declining numbers, the Southern Baptist Convention may well decide to play the race card, wrote Anthea Butler, gambling that white fear of America's racist history is important to its conservative membership. That's the same gamble GOP lawmakers are making across the country as state and national lawmakers try to legislate school curricula. And it turns out they made that gamble and they lost.
Oh.
What does that mean? I don't know. But going forward, we'll have to see what happens. Now, had they won, black members of the Southern Baptist Convention may have walked, and because they lost, we'll have to see whether conservative members of the Southern Baptist Convention walk.
All right.
So it's more about walking than woking. so we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yes.
Now, it's important to note that the Southern Baptist Convention has never rescinded previous statements, including a resolution in 1861 aligning the convention with the Confederacy.
Yeah.
It also puts a Southern Black Convention, some Southern Baptist conventions, black congregations in a tough spot. The SBC has made a push to diversify, even paying top dollar to black pastors who want to join its ranks with generous startup funds. But these efforts to recruit black Baptist churches and pastors could be undermined by what happens this week. So there's going to be a lot of fallout one way or the other in terms of what happens there. And this CRT stuff has even reached the Hill already.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Representative Jim Banks started questioning the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Michael Gilday, about is the military too woke?
It's a trap, Admiral. Yeah. It's super woke, the military. They love that.
And the military, the Admiral said, listen, I'm not going to sit here and defend cherry-pick quotes from somebody's book. I'm not going to do that. What this is really about is trying to paint the U.S. Navy as weak, as woke. And we've had sailors spend 341 days at sea last year with minimal port visits, the longest deployment we've ever had. We're not weak, we're strong. And so a lot of pushback about that on the Hill. So it's kind of infiltrating all sorts of things. Now, how long it's going to last and what kind of legs it has remains to be seen. And that's why I'm especially interested in what happens with the Southern Baptist Convention, because in a way it certainly mirrors the Republican Party as it's become more and more Republican. And the other side of the coin is the Republicans are more and more dependent upon white evangelicals. So you can't separate them. I'm going to look, and I haven't seen whether or not they took any stance on vaccination. Would have been very nice if leaders told their members and delegates and messengers to get vaccinated and get that message out there. But that's, a big problem in southern states.
That they avoid.
And Eric Topol had a really nice graphic, which I think I sent you, but is at the bottom of the Pundit Roundup today, about the risk for people because of the new Delta variants. That the risk for vaccination, the risk for getting COVID now, because some states are actually starting to see a little increase in cases, and Delta variants is about 10% of cases in the U.S. right now, and that will grow. So the highest risk is for people who are not vaccinated and have no prior episodes of COVID. Prior COVID alone gives you some moderate protection, but if you were infected, whether you know it or not, with a non-Delta variant, it's not clear that you're protected from the Delta variant. One dose of vaccination gives you more protection, and 2 doses of vaccination gives you the most protection. Or if you've had proven prior COVID plus 1 dose, again, the problem is that a single dose of the 2-dose cycle still leaves you only about 33% protected, whereas you're closer to 80% or more protected if you get both doses. And prior COVID alone isn't enough protection against the new Delta variant.
So you're saying there's a chance we can get Rand Paul.
And again, because the southern states are not getting vaccinated, that's where the risk is. So the Southern Baptist Convention would have been a perfect place to try to spread the word.
Oh, okay. Is that the word, right?
That's
spread
what they
that.
do.
Yeah, that's what we
They have messengers.
Right. Yeah, that's what it's all about. I was thinking it would be a pretty good place to spread the Delta variant if this had been written by a Delta variant, of course, which it's not. We don't want anybody sick.
Right. Something else that happened on the Hill that I think is worthy of a note.
Yes.
And that is that Marjorie Taylor Greene apologizing for affronting people with comments about the Holocaust. Did you cover that?
I didn't because, all right. She learned about the Holocaust yesterday. That's true.
Yeah, but still thinks
important.
Democrats are Nazis, one question.
Right.
But the thing that John Aravosis points out, which I think is the part about it that's the most interesting, because there's little about Empty Green that's interesting, is, as he writes in a tweet, it's fascinating, and it means the criticism of Marjorie Taylor Greene is working. She didn't apologize out of the goodness of her heart. She apologized because somebody put pressure on her, which is basically Speaker McCarthy, Leader McCarthy.
Maybe.
Wants to be Speaker. There's no way she would do it otherwise. You don't go out and apologize because, I think it's good.
Yeah, I just don't know whether it was McCarthy. My guess was that she had signed up to go on a congressional delegation junket to Israel over the August recess, and the Israeli Immigration Authority said, we're not letting you in unless you go to rehab. That's my guess.
That'd be interesting. She probably wanted to go to the Flag Day.
Right, yeah.
Which we'll talk about, by the way. Her rantings are hurting the GOP. Keep highlighting them, says Aravosis. And I think that's right. In other words, there's just, to me, no way that she would spontaneously
not
apologize.
at all.
It's not in her DNA.
Nope.
Which was probably changed by, some prior vaccine that she now is afraid of.
Right, the Holocaust vaccine, I guess.
Something like that.
Okay, well, yeah, she did some other stupid things. So if you want to We'll get to that maybe hour 2. We'll say. By the way, there were some other dumb things. I want to get out of the way of your list today.
Yeah. Anyway, other things that are of interest on the Hill is that Chuck Schumer more or less announced his strategy, which we had talked about on the show and predicted would happen. And that is that there's a 2-pronged approach to Infrastructure Week, which you're sick of.
Okay, right.
All right. Because you talk to Sinema, you get Sinema to talk to Portman, you get Portman to talk to McConnell, and you do a slimmed-down version of infrastructure that everybody on the left will hate but gets enough Republican votes to pass. Simultaneously, you do reconciliation for the big stuff that you as a Democrat wants to pass. And the thing that was interesting about it is Steve Dennis pointing out, reporter Steve Dennis pointing out, that the same procedure was used by Nancy Pelosi on the Affordable Care Act.
Yes.
Senate passed ACA, was held at the desk until a separate reconciliation bill arrived. They passed on the same day in March, 3 months after the Senate ACA vote. So she held it and made them go together before the House would approve it, because Nancy Pelosi sort of knows what she's doing and is familiar with House procedure somewhat.
Yes. Steve Dennis has a good eye for those things and a good memory. Good call there.
Right. He says it doesn't solve every problem the Democrats have, but it would give them at least some assurance that priorities would happen and incentive for Sinema Manchin to back the partisan package. They want to eat the bipartisan cake. You got to take the dessert. You got to eat your vegetables, too.
Yep.
But nothing's a sure thing in a 50-50 Senate where a single Democratic absence for any reason jeopardizes the whole project.
That's true.
And, not to be nasty about it, but you got to remember that Dianne Feinstein has to remember to show up.
Yeah. And
she's getting to be a real problem, by the way. There's just more and more public stories about her not being totally there.
Yeah. We made mention of it briefly yesterday with Joan, that she was asked about all sorts of things about the filibuster and about anything you choose to bring up. She kind of says, I'm not aware that was a problem. It's just been the headline in every major newspaper for a week, but whatever, you do you.
Anyway, so those are some of the background details. We have of course the big story, 2 big stories today. One big story is Carolyn Maloney in one of the House Oversight Committee situations where she's releasing emails that clearly show that Trump was putting pressure on Jeff Rosen and others through Mark Meadows to try to get the Department of Justice to get behind the idea that the election was stolen. And the Department of Justice not only didn't want to have anything to do with it, but they felt threatened enough by what was going on to, as they like to say in Washington, memorialize the discussions, which is to say, write an email that will then get discovered later that covers my butt to show that I was asked about it and I didn't want to have anything to do about it.
Yes, the James Comey experience.
Yeah, so that was kind of interesting. Washington Post, new emails detail Trump's efforts to have Justice Department take up his false election fraud claims. And the file included a forensic analysis of the Dominion voting systems machine the county employed, alleging they were intentionally and purposely calibrated. Now, this was just as Barr was stepping down. Like an hour before he stepped down, Trump was already hassling Jeff Rosen to do this.
Yeah.
The claims were false, but the email, one of several previously undisclosed records released by the Oversight Committee, sheds light on the type of pressure Trump put on the Justice Department to take up his crusade. Philip Bump over at the Washington Post says we're learning more about how Trump leveraged his power to bolster his election fantasies, and basically said this is the same thing that got him impeached the first time. He was still doing an hour before Barr resigned. Yeah. And so the whole pattern, of course, is pretty well established. It's just so odd because if you listen to Mitch McConnell, he made the point that there's really nothing further to learn, so there's no point in looking.
Right. Look forward, not back. It's
not
like there are any Republican
but it turns out that at least on this, the Democrats are looking back and not forward because apparently there's still a lot more to learn.
Well, some of the Democrats are, and I applaud them. And I'm not even really sure whether Greg Meeks is really looking forward, not backwards, or just was required to say that for some reason. But, okay, at least there are some who are not. Maloney, okay, big points.
Right. Now, let me give you a flavor of what some of those emails say, because they released the actual email with some redactions. When then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows emailed Rosen on January 1st to raise questions about ballots in Georgia and insist that a Justice Department official engage in this issue immediately to determine if there's any truth, Rosen forwarded to a colleague with the message, "Can you believe this?" The colleague, Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue, saw a silver lining, according to CNN. At least it's better than the last one. But that doesn't say much.
Now, what was the last one, I wonder?
When Meadows sent Rosen a YouTube video theorizing that people in Italy use satellites to affect the vote results, Rosen again sent it to his deputy, who, with no apparent hyperbole, deemed it pure insanity.
Yeah, get the net, guys.
Right.
Don't just email. All right.
So it was clear, by the way, that they also identified somebody in the Justice Department who was basically a Trump lackey, who people had tried to maneuver to replace Rosen, and wanted this guy, whose name actually I forget. I want to say Clark, but there's so many Clarks in government, I don't know if that's right. To look into this further. And when Rosen heard about this guy trying to take his job, he and like every senior person in DOJ said, "We'll resign if you do this."
Okay. Yeah. I mean, is this the guy we heard this story at least once. I mean, there may be a second guy who was out to replace Rosen.
No, I think it's the same story we heard the first time, but it's all part and parcel of the same thing. This is after the election. Trump has lost, and he's maneuvering to fire the people who are trying to do their job and replace them with lackeys. And just, this is part and parcel of what he did. Scary. It's a pattern. And the fact that Republicans don't want to talk about this doesn't mean that it's not news. It's staying in the news because there's just so much going on with this.
Yeah. Well, it's a problem. Recidivism in the Republican Party. You were talking earlier about MT Green. I recall her promising never to do anything like this again, but then having to apologize anyway.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just to clarify, I think on our way out the door, I didn't quite get all that statement out, but Marjorie Taylor Greene, I was just referring to the fact that she made a speech on the floor in her own defense when they were voting to strip her of her committee assignments, in which she remained defiant but assured everybody that she had kind of learned her lesson and she wasn't going to be a QAnon nut anymore, and you'd get no more trouble from Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, she wasn't saying she was giving up.
That's why censure makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Because you have to sit there in the well of the House and listen.
Right.
Instead of talk.
And that might have been the threat that moved her to apologize for the Holocaust comparison, but I was just saying that it's only been a matter of
I think you're right.
weeks.
I think you put your finger on it. The fact is that not only do Democrats want to censure her, probably half the Republican conference wants to censor her.
Well, right, and whoever's if my theory is right, whoever's organizing the Codell trip to Israel probably put that pressure on too. I can't include you in my list. How do I bring you to? We're going to stop at Yad Vashem. You can't be a Holocaust denialist or making comparisons between masks and Holocaust and expect me to put your name on a list to Israeli authorities to A, let you in the country, and B, be given the grand tour until you own up to this and reverse it.
Speaking of Israel, I spent a couple of days, Monday, for example, and the week prior on Thursday, talking about the Flag Day March.
Right.
And its importance to the incoming and outgoing governments. The outgoing government liked the idea. It's an ultra-right march through one of the more sensitive parts of Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, through the Muslim Quarter by far-right Israelis chanting death to Arabs and claiming that this is a celebration of United Jerusalem. So pretty provocative. And when it happened prior, it actually was one of the sparks to the Hamas-Israeli fighting. Then they wanted to do it again because it was time. And essentially the permit was withheld for sensitive reasons and put off until after the new government came in, with the promise from Netanyahu's folks that we'll make this an issue as soon as you are in power. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. The march was yesterday. It was provocative. It sparked some incendiary balloons, not missiles from Hamas, but incendiary balloons that they send over.
Oh, that's literally
with some retaliatory statements from Naftali Bennett, the new prime minister, to show how tough Israel is, and so on and so forth. So it kind of played out exactly as predicted. Although contained, because it turned out that everybody had expected it, and so it kind of played out the way everybody thought it would play out. So just closing the loop on that story that we had been telling for a week. But if you read about it, then you'll know what it is and how it happened and what was going to happen, and so consider yourself informed.
Okay, except now I need to go look up incendiary balloons.
Well, it's a lesser thing than missiles, but still a provocation.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, okay. I thought that sounded like maybe some sort of rhetorical device, like incendiary trial balloons.
Actual incendiaries.
Wow.
And then also to finish up what we've been talking about, on the Hill, as part of the Oversight Committee, they released a timeline of requests for National Guard help during the January 6th insurrection, which, by the way, was not a riot and was not a tourist visit, but was an insurrection. Mayor Bowser first asked for help at 1:34 p.m. Frantic requests for assistance continued for hours and were shut down by Department of Defense. The National Guard didn't receive an order to deploy until 5:08 p.m. This from Josh Dorner, who's reporting what they released. And it's kind of interesting that, Republicans have made a bet that they can just bury January 6th and people will stop talking about it. And instead what's happening is stuff is coming out, drip, 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 drip. And these sorts of leaks are incredibly politically helpful for the Democrats. And so probably Merrick Garland's all over it trying to figure out who's leaking this stuff.
Oh.
Well, it turns out they're having press conferences and publishing it, so it makes his job easier.
Oh, well, then, that's not really so much a leak as it is a press conference. I mean,
the Republicans are calling it leaks.
Who cares? The Republicans
because they don't want you to see these emails, and we're seeing them anyway.
Okay.
And they don't want you to know what happened, and we're finding out what happened anyway.
I understand the latest extreme, the tip of the spear, as usual. Tucker Carlson spent some time introducing the concept yesterday that the January 6th attack was an FBI false flag operation. So he's going full Alex Jones on that one.
Yeah, well, you're doing that because things are starting to get serious. So that's part of the whole deal about having all this stuff released. Meanwhile, this is from Newsweek, and so it's contemporary. It's published on June 14th, 2021. Trump threatens Pennsylvania state lawmakers resisting election audit. They will be primaried.
Oh. Okay. I was wondering what
you can read the story, but the gist of it is there. Don't forget, Pennsylvania folks have been touring the Arizona.
Fake.
So
I thought they were willing. What's he threatening about?
Stuff, and so have others. Everybody's going on this grand tour to see how can they bring the Arizona audit home to where they are. So the point is that Republicans are trying to make the case that why are you looking at this? You have to look forward, not back. And in fact, it's not a question of looking back. It's a question of looking what's going on now. And in fact, the Arizona audit is a reminder of that. So you don't have to worry about looking back. It's what's going on right now. That's here. Front and center. And in fact, Tim Miller has a piece about that in the Bulwark. Get ready for the crap storm that will follow the Arizona recount, except he didn't use crap. Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy's plan for Arizona is the same as it was before January 6th. In the months between Trump's electoral schlonging and the January insurrection, the GOP establishment participated in the coup two-step, during which they tried to ignore Trump's antics when they weren't actively enabling it by just asking questions. That's the same thing as doing the research. Sure. I'm just asking questions after I do the research. This strategy was a failure of historic proportions, resulting in the disruption of America's practice of peaceful transfers of power, a violent siege on the Capitol, and deaths of their own supporters who had bought the lies they were fed. You would think this history lesson would be something Republicans might learn from, but no. Today, the insurrection's ongoing, and the next potentially violent inflection point will come in the weeks after the results of the Arizona, quote, audit, unquote, definite scare quotes there, are revealed. The audit, which is being conducted by the cyber ninjas and funded at least in part by my old pal Linwood, is set to deliver some type of results soon. The Senate, State Senate's audit liaison, Ken Bennett, congrats on the fancy title, said that they expect the process will take most of the rest of this month. Much like Trump's Four Seasons total landscaping coup attempt, the Arizona audit is being ignored by Republican leaders such as McConnell and McCarthy, who are not engaging on the subject publicly and privately consider it a shambolic sideshow. This while conservative allies dismiss those of us who are alarmed about the ongoing risk. Meanwhile, the whole Arizona circus is being taken deadly seriously by Trump himself. He called Republican politicians who are ignoring the audit weak, and by his radicalized supporters who still want to stop the steal. Doesn't this all sound a little familiar? But there's more. Activists in the QAnon movement have described the audit as the first step in the Great Awakening. And Arizona Republican Party Chairman Kelly Ward has threatened arrests of those who didn't comply with the audit. By the way, the Arizona Republican Party does not yet have the power to detain citizens for crimes against MAGA.
I was wondering about that one. But, Steve Bannon has insisted that it will happen, up to and including the arrest of Merrick Garland.
One Arizona GOP precinct committee woman, Gail Golick, has quit her job as a real estate agent.
Everybody's a real estate agent.
These real estate agents.
Yeah,
the focus on uncovering fraud full-time, which she details on her Facebook and YouTube pages. One American News has hired a local propagandist, Christina Bobb, to cover the audit while also fundraising for it. And that's some journalizing. And then he mentioned Steve Bannon. And then Tim Miller asks again, doesn't this all sound pretty frickin' familiar? Only he doesn't use fricking.
Yes.
Sometime soon, the results of the Arizona audit will be brought forth, and it seems quite likely that the auditor ninjas will claim Donald Trump won, or probably won, who can say, or would have won if not for these meddling kids. One of the things I saw they were complaining about is that some of the audits looked too neat.
Oh, yes, the ballots
they were coloring within the lines, and therefore obviously was fraudulent, to give you an idea of what they're doing.
Yes.
And if this happens, the former president and his MAGA media echo chamber will once again stoke the flames of insurrection. Q adherents will convince themselves that one of the 7 seals has been revealed. Millions of Republicans throughout the country will believe it, and some of them will demand action. So when the Arizona audit bell tolls, what exactly is McConnell McCarthy's plan? Because it sure looks as though they're dooming us all to repeat the same history we just lived through. So welcome to Groundhog Day, folks. That's what you should look forward to.
I guess so. Yeah, I was wondering exactly what their plan is for when they. I guess they'll make an announcement at some point. But yeah, they're stretching it out. They're certainly milking it for all it's worth. But what are we doing about these real estate agents everywhere?
Really?
Unbelievable.
I mean,
where's a
good
thing in
used
their
car
life.
salesman when you need them?
I know. I mean,
when you think of Republican businessmen, you think about car salesmen.
Pretty soon we'll find out the whole thing is.
And instead, it turns out it's real estate agents.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I guess that's a good side hustle, and you get to set your own hours, and so that leaves you free to become a state legislator or something like that. Goodness.
Anyway, so while we're speaking, Biden and Putin are meeting. Mike McFaul had some interesting comments about this. Ex-ambassador Michael McFaul.
Oh, that guy. Okay. Yeah.
Who's now a professor. First, Putin will arrive first. Biden second. Putin has a habit of showing up late for meetings. He made Obama wait 40 minutes in 2012. If Putin is late, Biden won't be standing around awkwardly waiting. Actually, Putin was on time. Second, there'll be no joint press conference, which we talked about. Biden does not need to give Putin a global stage. Let him do it on his own with the Russian press. Third, Biden and Putin will first meet almost alone, but with a note taker on each side, Secretary Blinken and Foreign Minister Lavrov. Good. The Biden administration needs a good record, and Blinken knows cold almost all the issues that might come up. So I don't know if we ever get anything. Fiona Hill was talking about the fact that she was so horrified by the last summit that Trump had, the Helsinki one, that she threatened to pretend to get sick and faint or something just to see if she could stop it because it was just so awful.
Yeah,
and she's one of the people advising Trump, not Trump, but Biden about how to deal with this, given that she was there with Trump the last time.
Right, but that is a point of contention. People are a little worried about it, and they say, "Well, she was on the Trump team too." Yeah, but she.
Well, if they heard her testify, I wouldn't worry so much.
Yeah, right. Plus, she has an awesome accent.
The format means that Geneva 2021 will not look or feel like Helsinki 2018. Trump did a disastrous joint press conference with Putin and had no note taker in the room, and that's a good thing. Chalk up a win for Biden's protocol team. End of thread. So that's happening. And then Dan Dresner just had a note about the beginning of it. As they started to get ready to meet, U.S. President Joe Biden and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin took their first photo and shook hands with the Swiss president before holding their meeting Wednesday. And Dan Dresner note, I cracked up when the Swiss president said, best wishes and goodbye. It had a really strong, I'm out of here, losers vibe to it.
Interesting.
So now you're on your own. They're going to meet for about, hours.
Yeah.
And then they'll have a press conference after. So you're not going to hear about this again. You'll have, I guess, hours of cable news to fill,
sure,
while they're showing you, Geneva video. But then they'll speak, and they really don't know what's going on, and so they'll have to pretend that they do. And then in a couple hours, we'll find out what actually happened.
Sure.
So again, the two big news stories I see for today are the summit, and this is on the heels of a pretty successful G7 and NATO set of meetings for Biden. And this is already successful. Again, things don't happen at these summits. They happen before the summit and after the summit. And before the summit, Biden was able to project at least the appearance of a united G7 and NATO front. And we'll see what happens after the meeting, because it's not after the meeting yet. Then the other story is the continuing insurrection and its look at it. And, frankly, I'm more concerned about the current and past insurrection than I am about looking back at the summit notes from 2018. If I had to prioritize my time, it wouldn't be that.
Yeah, I guess so. Although, I guess the Foreign Affairs Committee will be wanting to look at the summit. So, sure, that's a current issue for them. And I guess perhaps more important than worrying about the last note. What do? You subpoena notes that don't exist.
Right. And the infrastructure talks, I think, are interesting as well. The bigger picture there, I think, is, from a center-left point of view, from a progressive point of view even, get ready to be disappointed. You're not going to get everything you want. But that doesn't mean you won't get anything. And so, the question is, in a organization, in a corporate setting like the Senate, where it's so difficult to get anything done, when do you accept that you got something, even if it isn't what you want? And that's always a tough choice.
Okay. Yes, I would say so. All right. That's what faces us. Let me ask you a question you mentioned about in the Arizona recount thing. Do you, when you vote in Connecticut, do you fill in those bubbles, those sheets?
Yeah.
Or do you, okay, so you don't.
Yeah, and then they are scanned and then they are kept.
Yeah.
So you can go back and rescan them if there's any question about what happened.
And
I'm fairly careful, but I can't tell you that I'm so neat that I never go outside the line. I just hope what I do is good enough.
Yeah, I do.
But you have to fill in the bubble.
Care about that, and I saw a lot of people saying the same thing. It doesn't really take that long to get the job done, but I end up in those booths filling in the O's. I'm very careful for the same reason other people were saying. For fear that going outside the line somewhere will motivate some Republican ballot auditor somewhere to try to invalidate your vote.
Yeah, exactly. But, let's say in a typical election in Connecticut, you vote on 5 or 7 different things.
Yeah.
You don't have a butterfly ballot with 27 different things on it. It's not a New York City election with 97 things on it. So you vote about, 5 or 6 things. And you don't have to vote on everything. If you don't know certain people, sometimes you don't. Usually it's a small enough group so that you know everybody and you have an idea of what's going on and so on and so forth. But my point is, if I'm voting for governor, let's say, or president, I'm really careful with those bubbles. And by the time I get to the local councils, or the selectmen as we call them here, maybe I'm not so careful.
I try to be careful everywhere.
I try to be careful, but I do the important ones first and be as careful as I can. And then when I run out of patience, then I go do the down ballot stuff.
Okay. I suppose that's a workable solution too, although every vote counts, especially
every vote counts for
tiny...
everything, and even school boards are important, folks.
That's true.
And if you don't think so, just look at what's going on with critical race theory.
That's right. Way to tie it all together there. That's nice. Okay, well done. We'll accept that as an informed conclusion. Then it's probably time for trash pickup now.
Yeah,
right outside the house.
So hopefully I've covered a whole bunch of things I don't know anything about, like foreign relations and the Southern Baptist Convention and Israeli politics, and and it's always nice.
Yes, it's worked out well. All right, I think it leaves us with plenty to discuss, and again, lots of time spent on the critical race theory story, and a good pickup there. There really was a well-reported story that gave us an awful lot to talk about yesterday and still more today. So keep an eye on that, I guess. And now I'm going to be holding my breath for when Arizona makes its announcement.
Right, and I think that's really something to watch for. And just as an aside, and for people who look at Scott Anderson's summary later,
yes,
I sent you a little mini video on the Israeli Flag Day march, so you get a flavor of what that was like.
Okay.
It's pretty embarrassing, but hey,
I can imagine
it happened. All right, take care. I got to go fetch Abby and keep her away from the sanitation engineer.
Yes.
Who's due any minute, and I will be back tomorrow, and we'll see what we talk about then.
All right, good. That'll be our plan. Thanks, Greg. Take care. All right, let's see. So what else can I jump into here? Oh, one of the things, I did share during the break with Greg, so he didn't miss out, but the rest of you did. So now I can share it with you. Something that's been sitting, waiting for a brief mention in pockets the other day. Just another, I mentioned that Marjorie Taylor Greene, no end to the entertainment fodder that she provides. You probably would have seen the comments the other day, and I never, here we really probably should have spent some time looking at what words she actually used, but I have seen people commenting that she has, in one speech or another somewhere, been commenting about her own dismissal of theories of evolution. She's, I guess she read in a book somewhere that at one point there was the band of Christian reactionaries who refused to accept theories of evolution because they believed the literal word of God as described in the Bible in English. God was writing in English, of course, as you well know. I don't know. So I'm not certain what her comments were with respect to evolution, but, of course, lots of fun being made of that, and I'm sure she expected that at the time. And there were at least a couple of things that I noted in that. Well, one being, of course, I was struck immediately by the idea of, she was the big CrossFit fanatic, right? And I was just sort of thinking like, hey, here's your favorite new, the fitness enthusiast who doesn't believe in survival of the fittest all of a sudden. Like, how do I reconcile this sort of thing? I guess people never really put those two things together, but it is a question I have for her. What is it that you work out for, if not, the idea that it's the fittest who survive? But I guess at a certain point that no longer drives her thinking about those things. And of course, she doesn't really, it's not that I think this will affect, exercise isn't going to affect evolution long term, true. But, I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting juxtaposition. But more interesting and more to the point, I guess, about her weird brand of, let's say, we'll call it Christianity for lack of a better term, although I think someone ought to come up with one. And they probably have. But anyway, I noticed people tweeting this, maybe the best reaction I had seen to this to date. There were two really pretty good ones, but apparently part and parcel of her comments were the over evolution. Was she was saying that she didn't believe that I guess all these COVID-19 variants that perhaps were worrying other people, she didn't believe that any of this could have happened naturally. And it had convinced her that COVID was in fact developed in, you know where, the Wuhan lab, that it was an engineered bioweapon because, she said, not being a believer in evolution, it was obvious that it had been engineered because God would never create a fatal illness that harms people. Because, I don't know, something benevolent God, I guess. I just thought that was pretty amazing, and maybe the best response to it, which was advertised as such, as somebody tweeted around. Here it is, the greatest response in the history of Twitter. It can be shut down now, except I can't just read it to you because it's a photo and it's difficult. But it's basically it was Yul Brynner here playing the Pharaoh in the Ten Commandments and just giving this look, that shade look, I guess, is what we would now call it now, to Marjorie Taylor Greene here. But I think, was it, I don't know, maybe it could have been, I'll see if I can find the tweet, but another great response to it so I can be sure of who actually said it was, using the old tell me you've without telling me you've blah, blah, blah meme, right? Tell me you've never read the Bible without telling me you've never read the Bible. Like, for somebody who passes themselves off as a Christian fundamentalist, and I read the Bible every day, and you don't remember anything about God creating a fatal illness that would hurt people. It was like maybe a major premise in the Old Testament, 10th plague, right? Okay. Just wondering if you were faking the Christianity all along, and thanks for finally settling that question, right? God would never create a fatal illness that harms people unless God creates a fatal illness that harms people, in which case it was perfect, of course. You know how that goes. All right. Anyway, I just bring up her latest foibles because between that and the learning about the Holocaust last week kind of thing, this was the sort of thing that she promised that she was never going to get herself in trouble for again when they voted to strip her of her committee assignments. And she was basically saying, well, don't go any further. Let's not think about censure or expulsion or anything because, while I still think I'm right about X, Y, and Z, I've learned my lesson. I understand that you can't do this and you can't constantly be making a problem of yourself. And I'm not going to do it anymore, except, weeks later, we are right back where we started from. And I guess maybe she thinks she's ducking censure or expulsion by apologizing for the Holocaust remarks. But at the same time, she's just making Republicans look like idiots week in and week out. And I guess maybe there's some possibility that eventually they'll get tired of that. Anyway, just wanted to note that for the record, that these things had happened, even if they weren't necessarily worth time of a major investigation on our program, the way the astroturfing of critical race theory was yesterday. All right, so what else is up? Many other stories on tap, but break coming up shortly. But let's see if we can't get started on some of these things and head down the path on some of these other stories. Here's a short-ish one, I guess. This, I think, gets filed with the Steve Dennis recollection of procedural plays used in the past. Again, I don't know if we spent enough time on that one, but to just give it one more going over. Yes, not yesterday, but Monday, when Greg said, all right, well, there might be this sort of two-track approach to Infrastructure Week, right? That the mansions and cinemas of the world would insist on a bipartisan package, and the bipartisan package would, by necessity, be a lot less aggressive in terms of pursuing the Biden agenda and the greater Democratic agenda in all of these things, but that the plan was, well, if we pass this and have our big bipartisanship party, then later we'll approach infrastructure again using reconciliation, and then get the bigger, more progressive, more widely supported in the Democratic caucus version of infrastructure through the filibuster-proof reconciliation bill. And we were worried about having the rug pulled out from underneath, right, and going along with the vote on the watered-down bipartisan version of the infrastructure bill with the promise that the other one's coming later, but how do you know? And what they were basically saying here. And Steve Dennis says it was AOC's suggestion that this happened, but it sounds like Pelosi may actually be on board with this one, which is simply to say, all right, well, the Senate can pass the watered-down version of it, and the House will simply hold it at the desk and say, we'll vote on it and we'll pass it, but not until you pass that reconciliation bill that you promised. And then when we know that that's on its way to the House for its approval, then we'll take up the watered-down version of the bill now that we know that you've delivered on your promise. And it was Steve Dennis's good memory that reminds everybody that's how they dealt with the Affordable Care Act. The Senate passing the watered-down version of it and promising to do some of the work on more robust provisions via reconciliation. And the House at that point said, well, we'll make sure that you make good on your promise by simply holding this bill at the desk until the reconciliation sidecar, you remember that was the terminology they used for it, actually passed before taking up the main body of the bill. So good memory on that one, and similarly good memory on the article I have here from Roll Call. I'll just throw this headline out and see if you can remember exactly what we were talking about. The Government Accountability Office said withholding the funds from obligation for the building of the wall, as the Biden administration proposes to do, is merely a programmatic delay. Do you remember what that is? All right, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Did you remember? Did it ring a bell for you? Programmatic delay. What are we talking about here? Here's the dry and boring part of it. The Government Accountability Office has a decision that they've published on Biden's holdup of border wall funding. Roll Call has that report. Here's the dry facts behind it. Biden's holdup of border wall funding didn't violate the law, GAO rules. And Paul Krauzak reporting this for Roll Call just yesterday. Congressional investigators said Tuesday that President Joe Biden's pause of more than $1 billion in funds for southwestern border wall construction did not violate the law, as some Republican lawmakers had claimed. I'm sure they were saying he's breaking the law, impeach him, lock him up, etc., etc. Instead, the nonpartisan Government Accountability Office, sometimes good, sometimes bad, said withholding the funds from obligation is a programmatic delay that is allowed under the 1974 law establishing the modern budget process. That would be the Budget Act, of course, also responsible for establishing the process now known to you as reconciliation. But that's different from a previous finding that, ready for this? Now you'll remember where programmatic delay came from, why it rings a bell, and why we talked about it last. The GAO says what Biden is doing by implementing a programmatic delay in diverting or delaying this obligation of funds for the southern border wall is different from a previous finding that President Donald Trump's administration did violate budget law when holding up Ukraine military assistance in 2019. Remember that? Which led to impeachment proceedings against Trump. But GAO also said it is sensitive to the fact that none of the fiscal 2021 appropriation for the wall has been obligated, and it suggested in the report that congressional committees require the Office of Management and Budget and Department of Homeland Security to submit a timeline for planned use of the funds. Biden, of course, campaigned on ending construction of the border wall, and on his first day in office, January 20th, issued a proclamation stopping wall construction and withholding obligation of funds to build it. Biden also ended the so-called national emergency declaration that Trump had declared to enable the White House to shift defense and military construction and other funds to wall construction. And of course, now Wednesday is sanitation engineer appearance day at the Connecticut headquarters for KITM at Greg's place. And of course, apparently today it's mow the lawn right outside my window day as well. So we've replaced the cicadas with the whine of the lawnmowers instead. And the fun part was the restarting of the lawnmower right outside of our window. Okay. There's more to the dry stuff here, but basically, one of these days I could read through this and parse the rest of it too. But I just thought it would be interesting to remind everybody that the claim of programmatic delay, the bureaucrats working in the Trump administration thought they had found that loophole. Trump, of course, never had any understanding whatsoever of what it was he was doing. He was simply saying, well, I just want to block the funds from going to Ukraine because I want to pressure them to start an investigation into Biden and Joe Biden and Hunter Biden both, and give me some dirt that I can use in the election. And if they're not going to do it, then I'm going to withhold all the foreign aid that we send them, even though that would, of course, empower Russia in its power play in expanding its territory and annexing Crimea and, of course, much of the rest of eastern Ukraine as well. But whatever, just throwing an ally overboard for personal ambition, nothing major. But the bureaucrats said, well, maybe we can come up with some cover for you and just say this is a programmatic delay, except that just didn't fly, even with the GAO. The same GAO that was perfectly happy to let Trump get away with stealing all that money through his lease on the post office pavilion for his hotel. So sometimes good, sometimes bad. But I just thought I'd bring that up in case it was a good opportunity to remind people. Programmatic delay, remember what that is. That will come into play over and over again in dry as dust reporting like it we got here from Roll Call. Now, on to some of the more exciting stuff, perhaps. But I thought that was a quick hit that we could share just before the break, and then, a little bit after as well. What else have I put away here? Oh, there's the Steve Dennis thing. Let's see. Sounded like a interesting and informative piece yesterday. Norm Ornstein writing again at the Washington Post with respect to, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema on the filibuster. This time taking apart their argument that, for whatever reason, he has nothing else to say about it. But the argument that Joe Manchin loves to give that, well, I'm against eliminating the filibuster because I think it fosters bipartisanship. And everybody says, oh my God, of course it doesn't. But, the trouble is, well, illustrate for me exactly how it does or doesn't foster bipartisanship. And, people have a couple of talking points about it. Now we'll add some more. Norm Ornstein writes, here's why it doesn't. The budget reconciliation rule has proved more of a spur to cooperation than the filibuster. But even that is limited. So here's what he has to say. Eliminate the filibuster? Both Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are emphatically no's on that, but both say the filibuster is key to making bipartisanship possible, and bipartisanship is the linchpin to a functioning Senate and democracy. The idea of the filibuster being created by those who came before us in the United States Senate to create comity and to encourage senators to find bipartisanship and work together is Sinema's explanation for her stance. Manchin, writing in the Washington Post in April, said, "The time has come to end these political games, damn you, and to usher in a new era of bipartisanship where we find common ground on the major policy debates facing our nation." Well, duh. But even if bipartisanship were essential to democracy, which it isn't, by the way, does the filibuster, as these senators seem to believe, enable it? Does it create the necessary comity? And I am giving that that strange pronunciation just to avoid the confusion with comedy, but we sometimes make them sound like the same word. The perception has been that bipartisanship does not exist in the Senate, even with the filibuster firmly in place. That's kind of true. However, he says it's not entirely the case. With a robust 68-vote bipartisan supermajority, the Senate just passed the Endless Frontier Bill to deal with competitiveness with China. Bipartisan negotiations over a police reform bill have reportedly come close to ending the logjam over the most difficult provision, qualified immunity. And while they are still far from an actual bill, bipartisan negotiators on infrastructure, 10 senators, 5 from each party, announced agreement on a framework for a deal that does not raise taxes. By the way, this gang of 10 here, this is the first time I've seen anybody bother to form a gang. Well, I don't know. Maybe they never really had this in mind when it was the gang on immigration reform. But, and who knows, maybe it was really only, my only real close reading experience on the gangs was about the Gang of 14, which was explicitly about solving the filibuster crisis, or the judicial filibuster crisis of 2004 and 2005. I guess we should say the judicial filibuster crisis / nuclear option crisis of 2004 and 2005. And there, the numbers of the members of the gang was explicitly tied to the numbers that were necessary to end the impasse one way or the other. That is, if Republicans were going to nuke the filibuster and just eliminate it for judicial nominations and get their judges through, they would need 7 votes from, they would need 7 cooperative votes for, how do we put this? So let's see. I guess the Republican majority must have been included 57 senators. And if 7 Republicans would go on record as saying, we generally, anyway, oppose the use of the nuclear option, and 7 Democrats would go on record as saying, we generally oppose the concept of filibustering judicial nominations on the theory that the president is entitled to his nominations, then together there would be 7 and 7, 14 of us. And in equal numbers, we would have assigned to this agreement the exact number of people. I think actually it was probably 5 on each side, but plus or minus 2 defectors, I think, basically is what it was, that would guarantee that neither of those extreme options would be taken. And the upshot being, you Republicans, we got the worst of this deal, really, I think, but you Republicans will agree not to nuke the filibuster, where, and on the same token, by the same token, the Democrats will agree not to support filibusters of these judicial nominees. In other words, they would vote for cloture. There would be 7 Democratic votes for cloture and 7 Republican votes against using the nuclear option, and that was the non-aggression pact, essentially, in the Gang of 14. But here, this infrastructure gang is 5 and 5, and while it's equal numbers on both sides, I guess that's really indicative of the faultiness of Manchin and Sinema's thinking on this, and everybody's thinking who's a big supporter of bipartisanship for bipartisanship's sake. Well, it has to be equal numbers. 5 and 5 makes sense, except what's needed here is 10 Republican votes in order to get past cloture, and to get past the filibuster with a cloture vote. And there's not 10. There's half the number of Republicans that you actually need to have a working agreement to get around the filibuster without nuking it are missing. And they can, they'll end up doing all this work and convincing half the number of Republicans that are actually needed in order to get this work done. So, that's kind of, I don't know what to tell you. That's kind of half-assed, and they really need to fix that. And nobody seems to have bothered to point that out for whatever reason. Anyway, back to Norm Ornstein after a little ramble there. Right. Where did we drop? Oh, all right. Yes. Noting the passage of the Endless Frontier Bill, and that was, I guess, supposed to be a nice thing. Right. And here they are. While they're still far from an actual infrastructure bill, they have 10 senators, 5 from each party, announcing an agreement on a framework for a deal that doesn't raise taxes. It's just that they need another 5 Republicans who haven't been party to this gang to agree to go along with them. And who knows where they're going to get them? Are they? Other issues, and even some confirmations, have achieved broad support. So far, there has been bipartisan action on paycheck protection, a bill to expedite organ transplants, and the creation of a new directorate on technology and innovation in the National Science Foundation. Whoop-de-doo. I mean, they're great things, I'm sure, but not exactly big-time national agenda stuff. Some confirmations, such as Lisa Monaco as Deputy Attorney General and Samantha Power as head of USAID, have had strong bipartisan support. On many committees, Democrats and Republicans have found common ground, as Senators Debbie Stabenow and Roy Blunt have on mental health reform. Now, why do we have these islands of harmony, even amid the deep dysfunction? Could it be the threat of the filibuster? Well, there's zero evidence that it is. So, like the Wuhan lab leak theory. But everyone loves to cling to it anyway. For issues like China and competitiveness, the bipartisanship came about because the political imperatives of the parties converged. If Republicans failed to support a bill aimed at confronting China on the international economic stage, it would be a detriment to them. And of course, if Democrats failed to deal with China on this issue, they would be attacked mercilessly by Republicans. So I guess they figured the same thing would happen to them. As for issues like mental health reform and support for the National Science Foundation, there are enough below the radar that there is little payoff in filibustering or killing initiatives, and passing some measures that are relatively uncontroversial makes the Republicans look constructive without their paying a political price with their base. Infrastructure is a more complicated issue. There is broad public support for it. A CBS poll found that building or repairing American roads and bridges gets 87% support from the public. Replacing or repairing water pipes gets 85%, et cetera, et cetera. More home care for the elderly, installing broadband internet in rural areas, public schools, construction, et cetera, all with 70 to 80+% support. As the network pollsters note, each of these items finds a majority approval among Democrats, independents, and Republicans alike. But make it President Biden's plan, and the results are different. 90% of Democrats support, but only 57% of independents. Even worse, only 19% of Republicans. The initial negotiations between the designated Republican leadership representative, that's Senator Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia, and Biden, fell apart because of that low support in the party for the Biden plan. Republicans offered a mere $330 billion. It's hard to say mere $330 billion, but that's where we are, in new spending, compared with Biden's $1.7 trillion, and set as a red line no changes of any sort in the 2017 tax bill. A formula, of course, designed to fail. But the subsequent negotiators had a different imperative. The realization that much of the Biden plan could be passed with 50 votes under the budget reconciliation process, so the complete failure of Republicans to engage on the infrastructure issue would have left them on the wrong and obstructionist side of an issue highly popular with their base. So, could it be that it's really the threat of reconciliation and not the filibuster that leads to some bipartisanship? Well, not necessarily. If budget reconciliation was a spur for bipartisan negotiation and at least agreement in principle, it did not work with the American Rescue Plan. There, even though it was apparent that Democrats could pass their full $1.9 trillion comprehensive plan with just the 50 Democrats, and that Biden had made clear his strong preference for a compromise that would find a supermajority, the Republican negotiations were absurd from the start. A lowball spending figure of less than a third of Biden's while eviscerating most of the Biden priorities. On that set of issues, the Republican imperative to deny Biden an early big victory, showing he was fulfilling his promise of working with the other side, trumped any desire to cooperate. It fit the broader motivation and strategy that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell made crystal clear when talking to reporters in Kentucky. 100% of our focus is on stopping this new administration, McConnell said, adding, "We're confronted with severe challenges from a new administration and a narrow majority of Democrats in the House and a 50-50 Senate to turn America into a socialist country. And that's 100% of my focus." On some issues, then, a rule like reconciliation can be a spur to compromise if the president wants it and the other party sees an interest in doing so. But it is a limited spur, giving something that fits only a narrow range of budget-connected issues, and not when the larger GOP strategy makes obduracy more attractive than cooperation. The filibuster, on the other hand, has not recently shown itself to be even a limited spur to bipartisanship. Unfortunately, as we look at the key issues confronting Congress and the country, where there is no spur like reconciliation, the prospect for something positive is grim. We saw this with the filibuster that killed the proposed January 6th commission, which passed the House with bipartisan support, gave Republicans everything they demanded, but was still quashed by McConnell. Its death by filibuster angered Manchin, but not enough to alter his basic view of the Senate. We also saw this approach with pay equity. We're seeing it with the broad election reform measure, the For the People Act, which has brought intense GOP opposition. Senator John Thune, the number 2 Republican leader, called the bill a thinly veiled power grab, which actually filibustering it is. But hey, who's counting? On the even narrower John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the previously enacted version of which was co-sponsored by Republicans like Chuck Grassley. Grassley and McConnell have signaled their opposition this time, and only one Republican, Lisa Murkowski, has signed on with Manchin as a supporter. On another issue where there is overwhelming public support, background checks on guns, Senate Republicans have shown no willingness to support either of the 2 bills that have passed the House. And since the burden is on Democrats who want these bills to find 60 votes, meaning at least 10 Republicans, action is a non-starter. When you have a system that is not working effectively, and I would think that most would agree that the Senate is not a particularly well-oiled machine, Sinema said, the way to fix that is to fix your behavior, not to eliminate the rules or change the rules, but to change the behavior. On the contrary, Ornstein concludes, the Senate Republicans have shown no sign that they are about to change their behavior. When it comes to the key issues facing the country, from saving democracy to tax reform to climate change, it will take a rules change, eliminating or at least modifying the filibuster to put the burden on the minority instead of the majority, to give at least a spur to cooperation. So that's a long way around to supporting also his preferred first step, anyway, of finding a way to make sustaining a filibuster require 40 affirmative votes against ending debate, as opposed to finding 60 affirmative votes for bringing debate to a close. and shifting the burden there. Although I guess I'm also interested in finding out whether there's any real appetite for doing that by committing to appealing the ruling of the chair anytime a cloture vote is held in which a majority of those present and voting expresses their willingness to end debate. But we haven't reached the 60 threshold. Simply appeal the ruling of the chair and say, well, it's my opinion that the precedent really ought to be that a majority of those present and voting can end debate. Simple majority rule. We should do things that way. And although you may lose in the ruling, you can appeal the ruling. And if the pro-filibuster forces don't remain on hand, at least to vote, I mean, Ornstein's talking about keeping them on the floor 24/7, and that requires even more manipulation than simply switching the burden. But I'm just saying that one way of switching the burden, at least by requiring that anti-reform forces keep their people in Washington to be available to vote, is to threaten that every time there's a cloture vote coming, you're going to have to stay here in order to defend yourself against motions appealing the ruling of the chair. All right. Well, let's see. A couple of other things I wanted to share with you, and maybe some other direction to head into. Let's see. Oh, no, we did cover the presence of Dana Rohrabacher allegedly outside the Capitol on January 6th. By the way, though, I have strong doubts about whether or not he actually made an attempt to enter the building, or rather, I have my strong doubts about his claim that he stayed outside the building. Former members, by the way, retain, in most cases, floor privileges in the House. In other words, they can show up to lobby, and I guess that's really what it's all about. But I'm having difficulty believing that Dana Rohrabacher didn't arrive on January 6th with the intention of possibly trying to use his status as a former member to get inside the building and even perhaps onto the floor of the House. But I don't know. I guess we'll see what the evidence bears out on all of this stuff, and whether or not he's prosecuted or someone turns up with photos or video of him inside the building. All right, let's see. Other issues perhaps worth including in today's roundup as we approach the last break. There's an awful lot here. How about this one? This is an overlooked story that's been waiting in pocket from out of Wisconsin. It seems important and passed more or less without notice, certainly on the show the other day. This is datelined from June 12th, so I guess the end of last week. Is that right? Wisconsin Supreme Court, partisan body that it is, Wisconsin Supreme Court strikes down Dane County Health Department order to close schools. A little bit of late-breaking pandemic news and or early breaking news on the next pandemic, or perhaps even the next round of this pandemic. The Wisconsin Supreme Court on Friday sided with private school parents and students in striking down a Dane County order from last August that sought to close all schools to most students to limit the spread of COVID-19. And basically here what's happening is another one of those situations where Republicans in one of these Republican-controlled states, thanks to the gerrymandering, stripping powers from local or state authorities, whichever the case may be, but so long as the authorities are controlled by Democrats, stripping their authority to do things that Republicans don't like. Just as we've seen with governorships in some states and boards of election and or secretaries of state. This one being, of course, the ability to say, hey, there's a potentially deadly disease in pandemic circulation in our area, and we would like to take the following action to tamp down on its spread. No, freedom, you can't make us. Kids need to be back in school. They don't get it, etc., right? The 4-3 decision, No one's surprised by that. With all four of the court's conservatives in the majority, comes with the school year essentially over, and as rising vaccination rates appear to have the virus in retreat. The court in September had also placed a temporary hold on the order, meaning schools were free to conduct in-person classes for almost the entire 2020 to 21 school year, as many religious schools did. But the court's decision overturning the order on both statutory and constitutional grounds could have future implications if there's an outbreak of dangerous virus variant or a completely new pandemic in the future. The court found that because state statute does not specifically allow local health officials to close schools during a public health emergency, Public Health Madison and Dane County Director Janelle Heinrich overstepped her authority, and it seemed deemed flawed her reliance on part of a state statute that said people in her position can take all reasonable and necessary actions to protect public health. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Shall we continue with this just so we get the gist of the nuance, I guess, of this faulty ruling by the Wisconsin Supreme Court, just so you know that you will, by law now, no longer be protected from pandemic outbreaks in Wisconsin, thanks to their anxiety over Democrats exercising the power they were duly elected to exercise. It is now the view of the Wisconsin Supreme Court that public health officials are no longer allowed under the constitutional and statutory allowance that public health officials be allowed to take all reasonable and necessary actions to protect public health. It's no longer reasonable and necessary to close public schools when there's a pandemic on. And I'm sure there are some Republicans who cheer that just straight up and say, yeah, that was ridiculous, even though the next pandemic might not lend itself to the, I guess now we could say, urban myth that kids just can't contract or pass on COVID. I mean, we already learned that that was false, but the next pandemic might not even have that as a false feature, but the school authorities will find themselves without the ability to tamp down on the spread of the disease because these guys needed a spot victory on this pandemic after the fact, by the way, and are willing now to shoot themselves in the foot next time, ahead of time, just to win a symbolic victory now. So where were we? The power to take measures reasonable and necessary cannot, they said, be reasonably read as an open-ended grant of authority. Well, okay. That, according to Justice Rebecca Bradley, in writing for the majority, doing so would swallow the rest of the statute and render it mere surplusage. That sounds quite intellectual. Rick Eisenberg, I guess it's E-S-E-N, Eisenberg, president of the conservative Wisconsin Institute for Law and, everything has shifted here, Law and Liberty, sounds great, which represented some of the plaintiffs in the case, hailed the decision. The order from Public Health Madison and Dane County closing all county schools was illegal, unnecessary, and unconstitutional, he said in a statement. Even as the COVID-19 pandemic recedes, the court's decision provides a critical correction that ought to prevent future abuses of power in an emergency and kill lots of people in Wisconsin. Just throwing that out there. Good luck to you, Wisconsin. Heinrich said public health was extremely disappointed in the decision and warned that it could have dangerous ramifications in the future. This ruling means that under Wisconsin statute section 252.03, we are no longer able to contain a measles or whooping cough or flu outbreak in a school, she said in a statement. So good luck enjoying. I hope you have a great time with the whooping cough there, everybody. This ruling impedes our ability to respond to any disease that might impact students, teachers, and school staff and impacts family and friends beyond the walls of a school. Unnecessary, preventable illness may certainly occur as a result of this ruling. That's probably one of the things that they weren't thinking too much about. COVID was brand new, of course, novel coronavirus, right? And we didn't know what was going on. What was this thing? What would it cause in kids and adults? How transmissible was it? But this ruling is, of course, overbroad and stupid. Things that you know very well are dangerous and deadly. Measles, whooping cough, or extreme versions of the flu, deadly strains of the flu. Now, things that are known and understood by the public still can't be used as a basis for closing the schools because these guys needed an instant victory on something that they had basically already lost on. Well, anyway, the court also found that for religious schools, Heinrich's order violated the Wisconsin Constitution's religious freedom guarantee. We have to be free to circulate the measles if we want to. And it questioned her decision to shutter schools, but not many businesses, colleges, or child care centers. The order from Public Health, which was to take effect on August 24th, barred schools from offering in-person instruction for grades 3 through 12 until the county met certain benchmarks showing the coronavirus was better contained. In effect, it would have applied almost exclusively to private schools because public schools in Dane County had already decided to start the year online for almost all students in almost every grade. The timing of the order, issued the Friday before many private schools in Dane County were set to start the school year, angered religious school leaders and parents who said it upended plans to offer parents a choice between online and in-person instruction. Between August 25th and 28th, 3 separate petitions were filed against the order by more than 40 parents, independent and religious schools, and groups that back school vouchers. Writing for the dissent, Justice Rebecca Dallett, a lot of Rebeccas there, argued that the state statute does indeed give Heinrich the authority to close schools in a public health emergency. There is no textual evidence for the majority to conclude that when the legislature directed local health officers to take, quote, all measures reasonable and necessary to control a disease outbreak, that it did not mean exactly what it said, she wrote. Reading into the statute a phantom restriction impossibly requires the legislature to write statutes today that specifically address all potential situations in the future, even those not readily imagined. She also criticized the majority for bothering with the question of the Dane County order's constitutionality, saying its erroneous interpretation fully resolves this case, obviating any reason to reach the constitutional question. Public Health in December announced that schools could safely reopen to in-person learning with virus mitigation measures in place and by bringing back grades over time. Many Dane County public school districts had already been offering some in-person schooling for some younger students, and that trend accelerated with the beginning of the second semester in January. The Madison School District did not start bringing the youngest elementary school students back to classrooms until March, with older elementary, middle, and high school students beginning in April. It was the last of the 16 districts completely or predominantly within Dane County to return its middle and high schoolers to in-person learning. Public health officials knew relatively early on in the pandemic that began in March 2020 that children were less susceptible to getting ill from COVID-19, but that they could pass the virus on to others. As of Friday, Public Health Madison and Dane County did not know of any COVID-19 related deaths or hospitalizations linked to in-person schooling in the county, and that's good news. Public Health Madison and Dane County became the first of 2 public health agencies in Wisconsin to have virus mitigation efforts challenged in the high court after the city of Racine Public Health Department ordered schools to close from November 27th to January 15th. The court issued a temporary injunction against the Racine order in November and said it would not determine whether the order was legal until it decided the Dane County case due to the similarities between the two. So now we have our answer. And once again, Republicans in Wisconsin determined not to allow Democrats to exercise any power of any sort, even for the public good, if they can find a way to strip it from them. And I guess now they have. So, like I said, good luck with the next round of illness in Wisconsin. Look for additional severity in the next outbreak in that state. All right. Speaking of COVID-19, as we always are, just wanted to note, as Justin Hendricks does with this tweet, that today is another important anniversary. 1 year ago today, Mike Pence, who some people wanted to hang for whatever reason, Mike Pence tweeted out his Wall Street Journal column that will forever serve as an emblem of the unfathomable hubris and incompetence of the Trump COVID-19 response. You recall, of course, the same response that Jared Kushner declared a great victory, right? And whatever, a great success story, I think was his quote. Anyway, Mike Pence back on June 16th, writing and tweeting in support of his Wall Street Journal column. Recently, the media has taken to sounding the alarm over a, quote, second wave of COVID-19 cases. Such panic is overblown. Thanks to President Trump's leadership and courage of the American people, we're winning the fight against the invisible enemy. And then another 500,000 people died. But whatever. History will never demand to know why we didn't hang Mike Pence, because they actually did try to hang Mike Pence. So they don't have to ask that question the same way they do about Donald Trump. Pardon me. Okay. How to occupy the final few minutes of the show. Well, I have a proposition for you. We have been discussing in the last couple of days the amped up use of the Republican propaganda machine, and in particular its use in trying to create scandals of the day and flinging whatever they can at the wall and seeing what sticks, and when they get some traction with something, going with it. Well, right now, I think what's beginning to happen now is critical race theory has become such a success story for them on this and gotten so many people outraged that I think it is, ironically, starting to diminish the ability of the same machine to generate new outrages. And it might be okay from their strategic viewpoint because they're enjoying success with critical race theory, and there is no need for new material at the moment. But it's interesting that sometimes they can be a victim of their own success. What do I mean? There was another outrage attempt flung at the wall the other day that made enough inroads for it to make it into my radar screen here, but has not so far anyway been able to catch on with everybody else. And perhaps it was just a little bit too ridiculous to catch on, but I don't even know where you draw that line. But here's an example of something that got flung at the wall that didn't stick quite the same way. Maybe you saw it, maybe you didn't. I'll start with the tweet from Aaron Rupar covering Fox's attempt to make it happen, and then we'll read the article that served as the kernel of truth in their exaggeration of things, just to see, to sort of illustrate for you how something could get started. And then it turns out to be a really interesting article all by itself, and leads to a very interesting inquiry that, people who are, wise enough to be able to understand nuanced stories might find interesting and informative, and Fox viewers will just find as an opportunity to distort and turn into fear-mongering for everybody else. So Aaron Rupar tweeting on June 11th, this screenshot from Fox News with the from the set, I guess, of their morning programming. Bye-bye apple pie is the big question. That's the big screen that they put up in the studio that the anchors stand in front of in pitching their stories. The Chiron says, Guardian writer, apple pie has, quote, racist roots. So basically the claim on June 11th was, well, now the socialists are at it again. They're canceling apple pie, ladies and gentlemen. That's the pitch here. First, Aaron says, they came for apple pie, and I did not speak out because I was more of a lemon meringue guy. What is this about? And did you happen to notice that Republicans were trying to claim that Democrats and socialists and AOC and what have you, Antifa, no doubt, were trying to cancel apple pie? It didn't register for me. I didn't see it. I was just sort of curious, though, where would they even come up with something like that? And sometimes I just think they think of things like, well, everyone knows that the phrase goes, something is as American as apple pie. So what would be the ultimate cancel culture accusation to make against Democrats? Well, they're trying to cancel apple pie, you see, because something. That would be a charge that would make people say, well, apple pie, things are as American as apple pie. They're trying to cancel. If you're trying to cancel apple pie, you're really trying to cancel America. I ask you, I'm not going to, now we are into the otter speech in Animal House and everybody walk out. So what was actually going on here? There really was a thing. What was it? It wasn't just made up. By the way, I also think when I think of apple pie, there was a I guess what qualifies as a great Chevrolet ad of years ago, decades ago, in which they threw together all those things that were as American as something or other, and threw in Chevy as well. I think the lyrics of the jingle was baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet. I guess that was the idea, being as American as, right? And Chevy was going to be as important. So baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet. And it just occurred to me that we're only weeks out from Republicans, I think weeks, right? Attempting to cancel baseball, right? They were going to do something to re-examine their antitrust status because they were willing to recognize the truth of racial justice issues from Black Lives Matter protests, etc. I think that's what we were on. But anyway, they were attempting the cancellation of baseball, and nobody ever put up a chyron anywhere that Republicans were trying to cancel baseball. Strange. So anyway, what was the kernel of truth? I was interested in that. And somebody in the comments thread to Aaron Rupar's tweet actually offered it up, saying it's not as ludicrous as the slogan it's boiled down to here, though I would say that it's a kind of dumb, contrived way to present a bunch of history that is, in any case, totally worth talking about. But here's the article from The Guardian. Let's take a look. Food injustice has deep roots. Let's start with America's apple pie. Well, of course, this is in The Guardian, so they can feel free to take aim at things American and get away with it. Sort of a pastime of theirs. But food injustice, kind of a niche area of study in social justice circles, and one we haven't spent any time on, but which isn't really, I would say, the real focus of what's happening here, as far as I've always understood food injustice, but nonetheless making interesting and valid points that are dangerous points to make to anybody but open-minded, intellectually inclined, nuance understanders, essentially, who will understand the spirit in which these critiques are offered. And it's dangerous because, of course, it could be seen by rock-headed idiots who will turn it into, they're trying to cancel apple pie, and with varying levels of success. Thankfully, not enough here. Raj Patel, also well-positioned writing for The Guardian to make fun of things American here. But this led to some real inquiries that were actually quite interesting, I thought. So I'll share it with you. Resting on a gingham cloth, a sugar-crusted apple pie cools on the windowsill of a Midwestern farmhouse. It's just, blah, the Americanism of it. But okay, nothing could be more American, officially American. The Department of Defense once featured the pie in an online collection of American symbols alongside Uncle Sam and cowboys. So there you have it. Once the Department of Defense did it on a website. So, but I think we all understand the Americanness of apple pie. Not, as they go on to say, that apples are particularly American. Apples were first domesticated in Central Asia, making the journey along the Silk Road to the Mediterranean 4,000 years ago. Apples traveled to the Western Hemisphere with Spanish colonists in the 1500s in what used to be called the Columbian Exchange, but is now better understood as a vast and ongoing genocide of indigenous people. True, a little overstated, but that's probably a good point to make about the Columbian Exchange at the very least. But interesting point here. Not that apple pie's Americanness depended on the mistaken idea that apples were first domesticated in the Americas, but still worth learning. Goes on to say here that not that the recipe for apple pie is uniquely American. It's a variant on an English pumpkin pie recipe. By the time the English colonized the New World, apple trees, and this is where, it becomes interesting and historical. By the time they colonized the New World, apple trees had become markers of civilization, which is to say, property. In Virginia, apple trees were used to demonstrate to the state that land had been improved. And so the various advantages that come along with that, being able to prove that, directly tied to apple trees. John Chapman, better known as Johnny Appleseed, took these markers of colonized property to the frontiers of U.S. expansion, where his trees stood as symbols that indigenous communities had been extirpated. A rather more serious implication of good old-fashioned apple trees and American hero Johnny Appleseed, but probably true. Also goes on to say, not that the sugar on the crust is uniquely American, not that anyone has ever claimed that it was. Sugarcane was first brought to the U.S. by Jesuits in 1751, but most U.S. sugar remained an import until the Haitian Revolution, when enslaved workers seized the French colony in 1791. European capitalists sought new sugarcane fields and workers. French merchants of sugar and slavery landed in Louisiana in the late 1700s. Within 50 years, the U.S. produced a quarter of the world's sugarcane, and New Orleans had become a concomitant hub of the slave trade. After emancipation, the economics of sugar shifted. The American Civil War pushed the frontier of sugar westward. Hawaii's sugar plantations grew during U.S. Reconstruction. When the Philippines was a U.S. colony between 1898 and 1946, Filipino workers were exempted from the Asiatic Barred Zone to work in U.S. sugar plantations in Hawaii, replacing more militant Japanese laborers. Of course, replacing them probably at a later date for different reasons than their militancy, at least in their labor issues, the actual militancy. Anyway, or worries about it, more precisely. Not that the gingham on which our apple pie rests is uniquely American. Okay, it's getting a bit ridiculous here, but also a good history lesson. Columbus recorded cotton being used and worn during his first voyage by his indigenous hosts. The gingham pattern likely originated in Southeast Asia, the word deriving from the Malay gengang, I hope I'm pronouncing that anything like it's supposed to be, a striped cloth that arrived in Europe as Europe colonized Asia. Cotton from India became central to the British East India Company, representing 3/4 of the company's exports by 1766. As Sven Beckert's Empire of Cotton tells, this war capitalism enslaved and committed acts of genocide against millions of indigenous people in North America and millions of Africans and their descendants through the transatlantic slave trade. In the process, cotton laid the basis of finance, police, and government that made the United States. All good historical points, although what cotton really has to do with apple pie is pretty tenuous. I mean, it's resting on a gingham cloth. How do we know that? Maybe it's just on the windowsill. Maybe there's no cloth involved whatsoever. But making a good point. Anyway, since this is quite a lot to acknowledge, it is easier to misremember. In the drama of nationalist culture, the bloody and international origins of the apple pie, I don't think they're really all that bloody, are subject to a collective amnesia. I think, like I said, he's maybe overstating his point by saying, well, apples, apples, we don't need to boycott apples or anything. But the point is that, examining the provenance of all these things, as examining the provenance of anything will probably lead you to some historical atrocities worth doing. So where were we? The bloody and international origins of apple pie, subject to collective amnesia in the imagining of American community. The dish is transformed into a symbol of domesticity. By 1910, it's possible for a theater review to celebrate a wholesome play as being as American as apple pie. That, I guess, is where the phrase actually came from. Good to learn that. Guardian readers ought to know by now, or ought by now to be familiar, with the exercise of undoing the commodity fetish. Scratch the surface of how a bar of chocolate, a tuna sandwich, or even a chicken nugget, and you'll find the horrors of international trade, just because international trade kind of comes with horrors. Violence, exploitation, poverty, and profit. Capitalist logic is everywhere the same, but countries are capitalist in their own ways. The apple pie is as American as stolen land, wealth, and labor. We live its consequences today. The legacy of the United States' founding, racial, territorial conquest and domination can be read off the Department of Labor's occupational data. In 2020, the whitest and most racially segregated job in this settler state was the appraising of property. I didn't know that, but I guess that maybe explains the real estate connection from earlier. So think about that. The whitest and most racially segregated job in America, as he calls it, the settler state, yikes, appraising property. 96.5% of property appraisers are white. By the way, the second whitest is managing a farm. Actually, something that, I don't know, did we note it on the show the other day? But I was just sort of taking a look. Oh, yeah, I think we were talking about that. When we were talking about, gee whiz, I wonder why they ended up with a dating app called Farmers Only, when we realized that black farmers, or farmers of any color, had been mostly forced out of the business early on. And yeah, I don't think we actually ended up spending time discussing it or not. But Senator Warnock's addition in the coronavirus relief plan, the American Family Plan, I've already forgotten the formal title of the bill at this point. But at any rate, introducing the additional funding for aid to black farmers that resulted in such a backlash among white farmers, highlighted that issue. But anyway, let me finish at least this paragraph here. So again, the Department of Labor says the whitest jobs in America, appraising property and farming. It is, therefore, I guess, hardly a coincidence that the largest farmland owner in the United States is one of the country's richest men, Bill Gates. Now that's something I didn't know, and that's something I actually clicked through to find out what's the story with that. And you might find that really interesting too. And I'll share with you the story that popped up as a result. I mean, it has to do with his investment strategy more than anything else. Bill Gates is the biggest private owner of farmland in the United States. Why is the question posed in the headline. The article is a couple months old at this point, but you might find it interesting reading nonetheless. We're a little bit delayed in getting our music started here, but I found the whole inquiry interesting enough to start clicking on all these links from the first article. I thought you might find them interesting too. All right, shall we soldier on with this? We're never going to get through all of it, but I wanted at least to get to that paragraph to try and set that up as another area for inquiry. By the way, in the United States, this article continues, the legacy contradictions within the food system are particularly acute. That brings us back to food justice. 7 out of 10 of the worst paying jobs in America are in the food system, and women are overrepresented in them. Nearly a third of families headed by single mothers are likely to be food insecure, and food insecurity is systematically higher in communities of people of color. So really just bringing everything under the umbrella of this food injustice inquiry. But anyway, what I really wanted to illustrate for you was the point that sometimes these things fail to be launched into outrage territory by Fox News, and it's important to note when they try these things and fail, just so we can talk about the volume of it, but also interesting to look at the kernel of truth that underlays them all, and I guess remind everybody that sometimes these inquiries are subject to intentional misinterpretation, and we may need to watch exactly what we let people know.
FromNetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All just a chill academic inquiry, of course. That's the upshot of all of this, and probably by design, part of the Republican plan. Now, though, time to turn things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with, I'm sure, a different approach to the day's news. Not that we've left any time to summarize it for you. Just stay tuned.